All right, let's talk about Chuang Tzu. Chuang Tzu was surrounded on every side by zealous moralists dictating the proper way to do just about every aspect of a person's life. So, just who were these oppressive moralists anyway? You might have guessed it, Confucianists. It was into a world obsessed with Confucian rules and regulations into which Chuang Tzu was born. So he lived in the 3rd century BCE in a district of China known as Meng, which most scholars locate as being near modern-day Honan, south of the Yellow River. Chuang Tzu's first name was Chao, and he worked for a while in the state lacquer garden, where they would drain the tree sap to make lacquer. But due to his total disregard for rules or propriety, it's not likely that he held that job for very long, which was probably just fine with Chuang Tzu. Now, Chuang Tzu, and that'll make more sense as you learn more about his philosophy. He was deeply influenced by the Taoist philosophy of Lao Tzu, and he really took his master's teachings about not doing to heart. Now, much like Plato writing about Socrates, Chuang Tzu's writings recount many tales about Lao Tzu, and they expand upon his philosophy. And just as Socrates wrote nothing and Lao Tzu wrote very little, both Plato and Chuang Tzu wrote voluminously about the teachings of their mentors, complete with their own unique spin, of course. In Chuang Tzu's philosophy, one did not need to memorize the Confucian rules for being a superior person, and nor did one need to keep them. The endless harangue of how one should be or what one should do or not do irritated Chuang Tzu, and it seemed to him not only pointless but destructive. And this is why. According to Chuang Tzu, everything is okay exactly as it is. The universe is one, Chuang Tzu taught. The moment you say something is not okay, you make a distinction and you do violence to the whole. Once you start making distinctions, once you say something is good, it implies that something else is bad, and suddenly you have up and down and hot and cold and pleasant and unpleasant and right and wrong and good and evil and useful and useless and light and dark and big and little ad infinitum ad nauseum. Chuang Tzu says, to wear out your brain trying to make things into one without realizing that they're all the same, this is called 3 in the morning. What do I mean by 3 in the morning? When the monkey trader was handing out acorns, he said, you get 3 in the morning and 4 at night. This made all the monkeys furious. Well then, he said, you get 4 in the morning and 3 at night. The monkeys were delighted. There was no change in the reality behind the words, and yet the monkeys responded with joy and anger. So let them if they want to. So the sage harmonizes with both right and wrong and rests in heaven the equalizer. This is called walking 2 roads. So, according to Chuang Tzu, all of these opposites, all of these things are illusions created by the human mind. The 10,000 things rise up from the one and then falls back down into it again. Seeing the one instead of the 10,000 things is not hard to do, and it's the only way in Chuang Tzu's system to stay sane. Chuang Tzu says, life, death, preservation, loss, failure, success, poverty, riches, worthiness, unworthiness, slander, fame, hunger, thirst, cold, heat, these are the alterations of the world. Day and night, they change place before us, and wisdom cannot spy out their source. Therefore, they should not be enough to destroy your harmony. The efforts of Confucius and all the other moralists were pointless, he said. Human nature is human nature. It is what it is. It is part of the Tao. Trying to change it is crazy and it's doomed to failure. The way has never known any boundaries, Chuang Tzu tells us. So those who divide fail to divide. Those who discriminate fail to discriminate. What does this mean, you ask? The sage embraces things. Ordinary people discriminate among them and parade their discriminations before others. So I say, those who discriminate fail to see. Not surprisingly, Chuang Tzu was an iconoclast. Skewering sacred cows is one of his favorite pastimes, and he delights in bursting the bubbles of every self-inflated ideologue who crosses his path. One of his best friends, Tzu, was also his constant foil. One time, Tzu said to him, "I have a big tree in my yard. It has a trunk that's so gnarled and bumpy that it's absolutely useless to any carpenter. Your teaching is just like that tree, big and useless." And yet, Chuang Tzu replied, it had the wisdom to grow so gnarled and bumpy that no axe will ever touch it. Nothing will harm it. If there's no use for it, how can it come to grief or pain? And is it really useless? Why don't you relax by its side and do nothing, or lie down underneath it for a free and easy nap? Okay, that's the kind of thing that Chuang Tzu says all the time. And unlike Confucius, who spent most of his adult life chasing after political appointments, Chuang Tzu not only loves naps, but he is totally against, hard work in general, but especially doing work for the government. Chuang Tzu tells us that one day he was fishing when the Prince of Chu sent 2 high officials to interview him, saying that His Highness would be glad of Chuang Tzu's assistance in the administration of his government. The latter quietly fished on and, without looking around, replied, "I have heard that in the state of Chu there is a sacred tortoise, which has been dead 3,000 years, and which the prince keeps packed up in a box on the altar in his ancestral shrine. Now, do you think that tortoise would rather be dead and have its remains thus honored, or be alive and wagging its tail in the mud?" The 2 officials answered that no doubt it would rather be alive and wagging its tail in the mud, whereupon Chuang Tzu cried out, "Begone! I too choose to remain wagging my tail in the mud." Chuang Tzu knew that the moment he accepted such a post, he would cease to be a free man. Suddenly there would descend upon him all the responsibilities and stress and expectations and propriety and all the things that steal a person's freedom. And that is the secret to understanding Chuang Tzu. His philosophy can be reduced to a single word, and that word is freedom. Freedom from all the things society tells us we should do or should not do. Freedom from stress or striving. Freedom from arbitrary rules that senselessly shackle us. And it isn't just freedom from the expectations of society. Chuang Tzu finds the lives of those who eschew the world and go off and live in caves to be just as imprisoning. There's nothing free about the ascetic ideal with all of its fasting and silences and self-conscious denial of every earthly pleasure. Instead, Chuang Tzu's philosophy advocates freedom from ideologies, prejudices, rules, structures, proprieties, and all the anxiety that comes in the wake of all such people-made nonsense. Chuang Tzu teaches that all loyalties are suspect, including one's loyalty to the state, or to one's ruler, or to one's family, or to an ideology, or to a religious doctrine. The only loyalty that has any value is the loyalty to one's true nature and to the Tao itself. So instead of chasing after cockeyed notions of right or wrong, Chuang Tzu invites us to see beyond such arbitrary distinctions and to rediscover an authentic way of being in the world. He wants us to respond with authenticity rather than through the filters of propriety, to react humanely as a human would to any given situation, just as a fish reacts as a fish would, or a bird reacts the way a bird would. So just as a dog doesn't fill his days with worry over how to respond to this or that situation, Chuang Tzu wants us to just be and to respond from our true and inner nature. I mean, look at the dog. When a dog is tired, it sleeps. Case in point, my dog Judy, right there. When a dog is hungry, she eats. When she itches, she scratches. And when she smells a delicious bit of trash, well, she helps herself. So not bound by artificial rules or rituals or scripts, Chuang Tzu says that human beings can discover who they were truly meant to be. Because if the dog can achieve this fidelity to their inner nature, surely we can. But the problem, the obstacle to us living in accord with our true nature is all of the messages that we're barraged by from our families, from our religions, from our societies. Chuang Tzu considers all these things nonsense. Not bound by artificial rules or scripts or rituals, Chuang Tzu says that human beings can discover who they were truly meant to be. And be here is the operative word. Not what we do, not what we accomplish, not what we achieve, but who we are to be in our most unaffected, unmediated, authentic selves. Only by discovering this true self can we hope to, in Chuang Tzu's words, stay in one piece, keep oneself alive, look after one's parents, and live out one's years. Chuang Tzu tells us you never find happiness until you stop looking for it. Happiness can be found, he says, but not by striving. The pursuit of happiness enshrined in the Declaration of Independence would have seemed backwards to Chuang Tzu, because, the pursuit. One is happy only when one ceases pursuing and striving and trying and allows oneself to simply be. When Chuang Tzu was about to die, his disciples started planning a sumptuous funeral for him. Not surprisingly, he protested, saying, "Why do you need to do anything? I will have heaven and earth for my coffin and coffin lid, the sun and moon for the pennies on my eyes, the stars and constellations for my jewelry, and the 10,000 things for my parting gifts. The furnishings for my funeral are already prepared. What more is there to do?" "But if we don't bury you," his disciples protested, "the crows and kites will have at you." Chuang Tzu calmly replied, "Above the ground I will feed the crows and kites. Below the ground I'll feed the crickets and the ants. Tell me, what do you have against the birds?" We don't know how long Chuang Tzu lived, but he has left a record that is unparalleled in the history of philosophy. He is one of the only figures in philosophical history to have used humor as one of his main teaching tools, and his challenge to us remains as amazing and earth-shattering to us today as it did 2,500 years ago. His invitation to throw off the bonds of propriety and social conformity is both refreshing and frustrating, and it is also often difficult to discern exactly where society ends and our authentic selves begin. But making that discernment, well, that's the spiritual task. That is the journey. A lot of people think that Chuang Tzu is impractical, and he might be. But he is also compelling. He's also very funny. He is some of the most enjoyable philosophy you will ever read, and I hope that you do.